ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Anthony Albanese has a problem. While the inflation rate has been coming down, voters are still struggling to make ends meet, and they might be gearing up to punish him at the ballot box, if you believe the polls. Voter confidence has taken a dive, and Peter Dutton is making good ground on his opponent. Today, Radio National Breakfast and the Party Room podcast host, Patricia Karvelas, on why it's all about the economy. Stupid. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. PK, we're going to unpack what's going wrong for the Albanese government, but let's just step back to May 2022. It doesn't feel that long ago, actually, that Anthony Albanese, he finally did it for Labor. After 9 years of the coalition in government, the ALP was back.
And it was a huge moment for the Labor Party and the Labor movement. He became only the fourth Labor leader to win government from opposition, which is pretty difficult, since World War II. Think about the people he was in the same group with: Gough Whitlam, Bob Hawke, Kevin Rudd. He'd made his way up to become Prime Minister, and the Labor Party was elated.
My fellow Australians, it says a lot about our great country that the son of a single mum who was a disability pensioner, who grew up in public housing down the road in Camperdown, can stand before you tonight as Australia's Prime Minister.
So, Anthony Albanese won, of course, and that was just over 2 years ago. But it seems, PK, that the shine is already rubbing off. What are the polls showing us, first of all?
So I'll get to the polls in a second, but to be incredibly fair and accurate, the shine often comes off a couple of years into a government. You lose a bit of shine, it's an inevitability. It's very difficult to maintain record popularity. So there are, though, a few worrying polls, I think, for the government, and I don't just think, I know that they are concerned, of course. A few polls that would tell the government that there's some issues in the community and a shift away. The Resolve Political Monitor for Resolve Strategic has the coalition increasing its primary vote from 36 to 38%. So, that's promising for them, while it's 28% for Labor. And Dutton is now leading in that one, at least, 35 to 34 as preferred Prime Minister. Although I've spoken to Redbridge pollsters, Cos Samaras and Tony Barry, and, they've described the situation we're increasingly in Australia as the double haters. Now, that was the Biden-Trump race as well, the double haters. An Australian Financial Review freshwater strategy poll also found last week showing that the coalition has inched ahead in the popular vote, Dutton leading Albanese by 51% to 49% on two-party preferred basis. The Guardian Essential poll, saying something similar. Basically, there is a trend away from the government, and I think it has a lot to do with incumbency and the cost of living.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about that. So, Anthony Albanese, he is slipping in the polls, but of course the election is still some way away. We don't know exactly when it will be held, but it's months away. But you've been looking, PK, at this really interesting long-running study which has been conducted at the ANU, which really shows the depth of trouble that Anthony Albanese could be in and why he could be in it. So just tell me about that.
This tracks the views of Australians since 2008, drawing responses from more than 4,000 to track, sentiments towards government and trust. It's broader than just polls about parties. It's about deeper issues. And it shows Australians have only a marginally higher level of confidence in the Albanese government than they did in the Morrison coalition in its last year. It does show us that confidence in the government has steadily declined from 51.2% in January 2023, right, to just 38.5% in January this year. That's the last time they measured it.
Yeah.
So, we're in the middle of the year now. It'd be interesting to see what's happening since. Things are really on the edge for people, and it has led to declines in how people trust governments.
Yeah. And what does this study show about the reasons that this confidence has declined so dramatically and so quickly?
So I think the ANU is so excellent at just really analysing data without the spin of politics, which I love. So the lead author, Nicholas Biddle, who's an excellent researcher, says the decline is reasonably consistent across the population. But he says the main socioeconomic factor associated with the decline, there is one really interesting one, is in education. So people are more likely to have confidence in the government of the day, at the moment Albanese, if they're more educated. And a big issue he found is housing and housing instability in this country, and we know we've got a housing crisis. It's increasingly related to confidence in government, and satisfaction then, of course, is the consequence in democracy. If you feel like you're living paycheck to paycheck, well then it's not surprising then maybe people would question, is democracy working for me?
So Anthony Albanese, he's on the nose with some voters with relatively low levels of education, according to this study, and those really struggling with housing, with their rent and with their mortgages. So, PK, that must be great news for Peter Dutton, you'd think.
Yeah, well, it is good news for Peter Dutton at a superficial level, right? It provides many opportunities to come in with killer political lines.
Interest rates will always be higher under a Labor government. And I don't think that Australians, after 2 years of Anthony Albanese, can afford another 3 years of this incompetent Labor government.
But Nicholas Biddle, the researcher behind the ANU study, says that the opposition needs to be very careful, though, about explaining these differences. He worries that by exploiting this stuff, you can negatively impact the system as a whole, not just one party. So you might exploit it and, try and get some political wins, which all political parties, can I say, not just Peter Dutton, but anyone would want to exploit. It's how politics works. You try and make the point about your opponent's deficiencies to make yourself look better and say things will be better with you because you want to get elected, and perhaps you also believe it. But ultimately, Professor Biddle really warns that this has consequences for faith in democracy, which, of course, anyone who cares about democracy worries about.
All right, so Peter Dutton, he can make this work in his favour, I suppose, but he does need to be careful because voters could be rather dissatisfied with both sides of politics, I guess. But how much of a worry then, PK, is this for the government? I mean, there's so many people really struggling to make ends meet across the board, regardless of education at this point, and they could very well blame the government for that, couldn't they, the people that are in power?
It is a natural response that if you're feeling dissatisfied with your life, that you want to punish a government. So there is a real risk for the government. They haven't got a thumping majority. Now, history shows us that when the economy is doing well and voters generally feel like their standard of living is being maintained or even going forward, that they usually reward the government of the day. I think about the Howard years and the wins of John Howard. One thing that was consistent was economic growth and just a really kind of booming economy broadly, right? So people feeling satisfied. There are some interesting trends that tell you something about how people feel. After the COVID-19 pandemic, government intervened heavily in the economy and, JobKeeper, all of that. And confidence was really high because people were really trusting their government and feeling like even though this was a bleak time, their government was intervening economically to save them. But from November 2022 onwards, and there were lots of things that happened, I don't want to go through all of the history, but confidence declined quite substantially, so much so that by April 2022, confidence was just above pre-pandemic levels. And that really was a problem, of course, for the previous government and really helped Anthony Albanese win, and he was able to sort of sustain that love for a while until, of course, the economy is stupid.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so history shows us when the economy is doing well, voters are really satisfied with the government of the day. But is there anything else, I guess, PK, do you think that will play into this for Anthony Albanese? Because, of course, we've had other things happening. The voice referendum, that failed, of course. We've had a cabinet reshuffle this week. But does the economy trump all of that? Do people just not worry about policy at this point?
The biggest thing that people are telling all pollsters, all focus group people, is they are overwhelmingly only concerned about their cost of living. Mm-hmm. And just if you look around the world and the backlash against governments, including now he's saying he's not going to run again, but even Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden's set of numbers, the Democrats spend most of their time scratching their heads going, the economy's going in the right direction, but we're not getting any credit for it. There are similarities with the Albanese government, kind of like, we're bringing down inflation. They are bringing down inflation. That is a fact. Anyone listening, we have to stick to facts. This government has presided over a reduction in inflation from what they inherited when they were elected.
We're helping to ease the cost of living without adding to inflation. We're determined to help Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn, which is why we've delivered tax cuts for every single taxpayer, why we're pleased that real wages are increasing again.
But that might be on paper, just like Biden's sort of on paper stats were all right, but people's sustainability in their households, their own budgets, don't feel like they're keeping up with the cost of things, then I don't think they go, God, your set of numbers are great. You should be rewarded for your fantastic set of numbers. And this is a killer for incumbents. A killer. It's one case during a cost of living crisis where being an incumbent is actually weirdly not beneficial because the political mantra is that the office of Prime Minister gives you this prestige, that it gives you a leg up. But when there's a cost of living crisis, not so much.
So if Peter Dutton can convince voters that he can do a better job of the economy than Anthony Albanese has done, there is actually a real prospect that he could be Prime Minister by next year.
I think anyone who discounts Peter Dutton is a fool, and all of the hard heads I talk to on the Labor side of politics know that. What Peter Dutton's got is, community anger at their standard of living eroding. Now, Albanese will say to people, your wages have gone up under me. And he's correct. Wages have increased under this government. Could Peter Dutton become Prime Minister? I believe yes. Is his pathway easy? No. But Labor has a lot of work to do in places where people are feeling disenfranchised, tired of this cost of living crisis or whatever you want to call it, just malaise. And a lot of things have got to go right for the government. Interest rate increase would be diabolical for the government.
Yes. So one fix, PK, for Anthony Albanese to try and turn these polls around to ensure he can win for a second time, he wants a rate cut, right? He needs it.
Of course he wants one. He wants one, but he can't control it. There's a lot that has to play out still in the economy, and it's a difficult time ahead. Ultimately, though, this is all you're going to hear them talking about. People's material living conditions will be the number one issue at the next election. All of the other issues, not to say migration, immigration, all those other things don't matter. They'll play a role, but they are not the overwhelming issue.
Patricia Karvelas is the host of ABC Radio National Breakfast and the Party Room podcast. This episode was produced by Oscar Coleman. Audio production by Anna John. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again tomorrow. Thanks for listening.